everyday part of life. It is hard for us in modern day to imagine a world without school and education in some form or another. There are TV shows and movies based around it on all levels, from students to teachers. School holidays affect businesses and life for adults, with spring break starting as a simple school holiday. You enter kindergarten at age 5 and stay in school for the next 12 or so years. You learn from teachers who themselves have gone to school for multiple years to learn how to teach. A teacher might change up the way it is taught, but you know you are learning from a standardized curriculum. You may go to an independent school, more commonly known as private school. This can be run by a religious group or a private company. Or you may attend a public school, which is funded by the provincial government. You may even be homeschooled. No matter what form of schooling you have, there are still rules and curriculum set out by a governing body. But for much of history, this was not a thing. Education has changed drastically over the last couple of decades alone. I wanted to look into the history of the school system I myself was part of. Many of the schools in Kamloops, both elementary and high school, are named after individuals who played pivotal roles in shaping the region's educational landscape. I wanted to explore the lives of those people.
The education system of BC was started back during the days of the Hudson's Bay Company. Shortly after the creation of the Vancouver Island colony, James Douglas, who served as the new governor as well as the chief factor of the company, saw the growing need for education of the children of the officers. Education was at this time non-standardized and was often for only the wealthy or at least urban-based families. Douglas hired Reverend Robert Staines, an English clergyman who had worked in Europe as a teacher and private tutor before his appointment, to both the company's schoolmaster alongside the chaplain. Staines and his wife Emma, who herself was a well-educated woman, taught alongside her husband. The education system of BC was started back during the days of the Hudson's Bay Company. Shortly after the creation of the Vancouver Island colony, James Douglas, who served as the new governor as well as the chief factor of the company, saw the growing need for education of the children of the officers. Education was at this time non-standardized and was often for only the wealthy or at least urban-based families. Douglas hired Reverend Robert Staines, an English clergyman who had worked in Europe as a teacher and private tutor before his appointment, to be both the company's schoolmaster alongside the chaplain. Staines and his wife Emma, who herself was a well-educated woman, taught alongside her husband. They arrived in Victoria in 1849, where they found no schoolhouse or accommodation for them. Despite disappointment, the Staines took to teaching the 20-odd students, mostly children of HBC officers. He was paid $100 a year as a chaplain, as well as an additional $340 for the schooling, money paid for by the parents of the children. Unfortunately for the Staines and the children he taught, he and Douglas grew to dislike one another, leading to political discourse between the men. In 1854, the first school teacher in BC was let go from his position. A few other religious orders founded schools, including a Catholic school headed by Father Honor Timothy Langford, as well as a group from the Order of St. Anne's, an order from Quebec that established a few schools within the province. The call for a public school system grew, and in 1865, Alfred Waddington, the first colonial superintendent of education, was elected. Waddington had travelled from England as a young man, drawn to the Fraser gold rush as many were. Unlike many, though, he was not interested in gold, but rather what the colony could become, encouraging the settlement to grow. He was elected to the House of Assembly in 1860, having called for religious equality, women's rights, and a small government. He only lasted a year in the House, but remained in politics even after his tenure there. He helped to draft Victoria's charter, but declined the role of mayor in order to focus on being the superintendent of education. He would remain in this position for a short time, though, as upon joining the Vancouver colony with the British Columbia colony, his position was made powerless. It would take until 1872 with the creation of the 1872 Public School Act, which was to quote, "Whereas it is expedient that provision should be made for the establishment, maintenance and management of public schools throughout the province of British Columbia." John Jessup was elected to be the first superintendent under the new act, With a yearly salary of $2,000, around $50,000 today, a large sum for a civil servant role at the time, Jessup stated that to understand the system he was in control of, that he would need to know it as well. In 1873, he travelled across BC visiting various schools and towns. Upon his visit to Kamloops, he met with the settlers of the district and agreed that around 200 children in the area needed a boarding school and initially recommended Kamloops. He was later persuaded by Charles A. Semlin, a rancher politician from the Cache Creek area, arguing that Cache Creek was a better spot due to its location on the Caribou Wagon Road. Semlin was also the acting school teacher of the area. Kamloops would go without an established public school for a time longer, though private schools were run in the area. Jessup was instrumental in expanding and improving the public system, tripling the amount of teachers, standardizing curriculum, as well as he saw the first BC high school. Unfortunately, the school in Cache Creek would lead to his downfall. Mired with issues including misappropriated funds and supplies and so-called immorality among the students there, Jessup's reputation was tarred and eventually leading to his resignation of the position. Despite the early issues, the public school system in BC was growing stronger and stronger. The Public School Acts of 1873, 74, and 76 continued to grow the rules of education in the province. Schooling was made essential for children between the ages of 5 and 12 for at least 6 months of the year, though the Act did allow for so-called other education which could be private. Many of the earlier teachers who would come to teach in BC came from out east, usually from Ontario. A teaching college called Toronto Normal School had been established there in 1847. An advertisement was published by Jessup in the Toronto Globe and Mail that stated, "School teachers wanted, salaries from $50 to $60 per month. In newly formed country districts, teachers must expect, for a time at least, more or less isolation. Cost of board, $16 to $25 per month. Victoria, April 12, 1875. There was a process created in BC in early 1870 to certify teachers. The 1872 Public School Act stated the following regarding certification. No person shall be appointed as a teacher at any public certificate school unless he shall hold a first, second, or third class certificate, or a temporary certificate of qualification from the Board of Education. BC received the first provincial normal school in 1901 located in Vancouver. The ratio of early public school teachers were relatively split between men and women, though women were stymied by harsher rules than their male co-workers, as well as subject to lower wages, something that made them more appealing to the growing school boards, as growing costs weighed mostly on taxpayers. It was argued that a woman's mission was predominantly that of an educator, specifically of infants and young children. Women were allowed to work outside of the home, but it was emphasized that the idea of women being seen as naturally nurturing was perfect for teaching young children. Women teachers were also held to different relationship standards than males, typically not allowed to marry. It was seen as not right for a woman to be a wage earner in marriage. This made it difficult for women to move up in the ranks of administrative responsibility. Many female teachers worked or ran private schooling groups, which was not as official as public schooling was, but allowed them a lot more freedom, including religious, as the BC Public School Acts had been made secular. Quoting the 1876 Act, all public schools established under the provisions of this Act shall be conducted upon strictly secular and non-sectarian principles. The highest morality shall be inculcated, but no religious dogmas or creed shall be taught. Each year, the BC public school system was solidifying its significance and impact within the province.
Here we come back to focus on Kamloops itself. While the first attempt at a public school based in town failed, that is not to say there was no schooling available. Nellie Roper opened the first school in town. She was an Irish governess, a governess being a private teacher of sorts for children. Nellie opened her school in her home, which was located behind the Dominion Hotel, which itself was located on Main Street, now around West Victoria. She eventually moved to another location on Peterson Creek due to demand, and the school grew to allow boarders, often children of ranchers who lived outside of town. Unfortunately for Kamloops and Nellie Roper, the school was closed in 1882, when Nellie's husband Tom objected to her business, forcing her to close the doors. But it was not only the parents of children in town who saw the need for schooling, but also some members of religious sects. The Oblate Fathers, a Catholic sect that had established churches across BC, saw the need for education and took the matters into their own hands. A school was built in 1878 under the watchful eye of Reverend Father Grandidier. The finished school went unstaffed until 1880, when 3 sisters from the St. Anne's Convent in Victoria arrived in Kamloops. The school started small, with only 1 young girl being the first pupil. Within a year, the numbers had grown to 20. There was a monthly fee of $10 to attend the school, though needy children were educated and housed for free. The school continued to grow, necessitating 2 separate moves until it found its permanent home, where it is still located today. The school's early curriculum included reading, writing, geography, composition, grammar, arithmetic, and history. There was a lack of supplies for the early school, and the children used rough slates to write on rather than paper. A second school, by the name of St. Louis College, was built for boys, as St. Anne's initially only allowed girls. Eventually, the college would close, and the boys would join St. Anne's itself. One of the earliest public schools in the area was located outside of Kamloops proper in Rayleigh. Now around a 15-minute drive from downtown Kamloops, it would have been a long trek for Kamloops students. The school in Rayleigh was based in a simple log cabin. The school's teacher was a woman by the name of Margaret Dallas. It is after her family that the Kamloops neighborhood is now named. Margaret Dallas was in fact a passenger on the first train to travel through Kamloops, where she was heading to Victoria to write her teaching exams. But not much else is written about Miss Dallas. In many of the sources I studied, her name is mentioned in only a handful of sentences. When I tried to dig deeper, the most I could find was a picture and those same few lines. I quoted Laurel Thatcher Ulrich in my first episode, stating, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." Miss Dallas, or later Mrs. Slavin, seems to fall into that category of well-behaved women. Her story is almost totally removed from the larger narrative, as it wasn't seen as interesting enough to record in full. This is a fate that's befallen multiple women throughout history. Moving forward from that early school, the calls for public school within the town itself grew. In 1886, the cries of the people were answered, with the Department of Education promising that a school would be built within the year. The community voted for a board of school trustees, with 3 men, W. Dodds, Ned Cannell, and F. Robson, being elected. A site was chosen by the board, and the Department of Education allotted a sum of $2,265 for the project. $1,600 of the funds, around $54,000 in modern currency, was allotted for the building and supplies, with the rest being put aside for the first teacher's salary. E. Stewart Wood was chosen by the Department of Education to come to Kamloops as the first teacher. Stewart Wood was born in Peterborough, Ontario, moving to BC in 1885. He lived in Victoria for a brief time before moving to Kamloops. When Wood arrived to take on the position, he found that the school itself was unfinished. And so the early classes for the initial 9 students enrolled took place in a local blacksmith shop that had been hastily outfitted to allow for the class. The original school was completed in October of 1886 and was located on First Avenue, around where the old Kamloops courthouse stands today. The new school was a one-frame structure and would quickly be proven too small. New influxes of settlers with every passing day meant the original 9 students grew to 78 by the end of the first school year. Additions were added to the school, and a second teacher by the name of Gertrude Clark was hired. Miss Clark, in fact, was the daughter of Kamloops' first mayor. She did not teach at the school for long, as she married Stuart Wood in 1888. The school only continued to grow, with additional wings being added to try to keep up with the demand. A third teacher was hired by the name of Janet Hepburn. It was in 1893, with nearly 140 pupils, that the Board of Trustees decided a new location was necessary, rather than continuing to add on to the existing school. The location chosen is where the school still stands today, located on 2nd Ave in St. Paul. Though the iconic brick building would not be built for a few more years. The school was outfitted with new equipment in its large classrooms. The new school continued to grow, necessitating more expansions. The brick building that still stands today was built between 1906 and 1907. There was also a growing need for a high school to address the overcrowding. It would take until 1904 for the first public high school to be made a reality. A. Perry was hired to become the school's first high school teacher. The initial location changed multiple times due to a lack of space, and until 1907 when they moved into the new school. Stuart Wood was named principal of the school that would eventually bear his name shortly after his arrival in Kamloops, and would hold the position until his retirement in 1910. The position was split into 2, with a principal being assigned to the high school and elementary school separately. The school was named after Stuart Wood in 1922, after an essay contest was put to Kamloops students to name some new schools. 2 students, by the name of Dorothy Matthews and Alice Powers, tied the competition, having both suggested Stuart Wood and Lloyd George. But Stuart Wood is not one of the only influential teachers who helped shape the educational landscape of Kamloops. The Beatty family came to Kamloops in 1893 when the family patriarch, Martin Beatty, an Irish government worker, moved there. He brought along his wife and 6 children, 5 being his daughters Florence, Emily, Harriet, Mabel, and Elizabeth, though she went by Lillian. Shortly after their arrival, Lillian Beatty opened a private school called the Kamloops Select School. She had taught back in Ireland, though she did not have a degree, which could be in part why she opened her school privately. The Select School was a great success, and 3 of the sisters worked there. The school operated until 1933, with Lillian retired, though she remained an active community member until her death in 1966. But the Beatty sister I really want to talk about when I started this show was Emily Beatty. She was born in 1877 and taught at Lillian's Select School for a few years while she was taking her provincial teaching exams. She taught at the Campbell Creek School for a few years while taking higher certifications. She then went to work in the Kamloops Public School in 1887 and became first assistant under Stuart Wood. She left Kamloops for a time and taught in Vancouver, but returned to teach at the new public high school. Emily was very successful at her position and was considered for the role of principal. She was overlooked, though, by the school trustees, who did not want to name a woman to such a high position. R. Whedon was named principal instead of Emily. He was seemingly unpopular, though, with much of the town objecting to his appointment. As well underrated, the school saw a massive drop in grades, causing him to be let go due to the public outcry. Emily was named principal after his firing, a position she would hold for the next 4 years. She was Kamloops' first female public school principal. Emily was said to have high academic standards for both herself and her pupils. Under her, the school became known for its high academic standards, with many of her pupils winning provincial awards. Unfortunately for Emily, though, the Board of Trustees were wary of a female principal, especially an independent woman like she was. The cracks began to show in October 1918. Emily got into a disagreement with the school's janitor. She had come in on a cold morning to find the school's heater had not been started, one of the janitor's jobs. When she went to speak to him about it, he responded with abusive language and refused to work. She went to the Board of Trustees with a complaint against him. The board did nothing for 2 weeks before sending a letter stating they regretted the incident and they hoped it wouldn't occur again. Emily responded with a letter of resignation, stating the board obviously preferred a janitor over the dignity of a principal. The board pushed the janitor to apologize, which reportedly was half-hearted at best, as well as created new rules for him, removing the duties he refused to do in the first place. This proved to be the final straw for Emily, and she resigned fully in November of 1918. She moved to Victoria, where she led a successful teaching career. Emily was the first female principal in Kamloops, and she would remain the only for quite some time. Her struggle with the school board reveals a lot about how female teachers were viewed. No matter how talented they might be, or how good of academic results they produced, there was still a bias due to their gender. In 1958, the Beatty sisters' contribution to education in Kamloops was recognized, a new school being named after them in a small ceremony. When I sat down to write Maddog's Herstory, I initially did not give much thought to schools in Kamloops. Sure, I had seen all the names, like Beatty, Dallas, and Stuart Wood, but I never thought of the people behind those names. Education has always been a part of my life, making it hard to picture a time without it. Learning about the early schools and their teachers made me think about their impact. I wouldn't be doing this show without education, as the research, the writing, the speaking were all skills I learned from school. It's easy to take for granted the opportunities we have. Knowing the history of the people serves as a reminder of their cultural and educational impact on our town.